Don't let them find the violin. The words reached Sophie Turner before she fully understood that the stranger was speaking to her. 12 minutes remained before the last downtown train, and until that moment, the most important thing in her world had been the $86 she still needed for an orchestra audition fee due by 8 the next morning. She stood beneath the flickering lights of Fulton Street Station, her violin tucked beneath her chin, drawing the final notes of meditation from thighs through the cold underground air. The melody rose above the rumble of distant trains, softened the metallic screech of wheels, and made a little girl in a red coat stop tugging at her mother's hand. Most commuters passed without looking. A few dropped quarters or folded bills into Sophie's open case. She noticed every sound: coins striking velvet, shoes tapping tile, the soft hiss of the ventilation grates. Then she noticed footsteps that did not belong to the rhythm of the station. Slow, uneven, too heavy on one side. Sophie kept playing, but her eyes shifted toward the staircase at the far end of the platform. A man in a dark overcoat had appeared beneath the exit sign. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed too carefully for someone wandering through a subway station near midnight. His black shoes looked polished despite the rain above ground. A silver watch flashed beneath his sleeve, its face cracked across the center. One hand rested against his side, the other trailed along the tiled wall as if the wall were the only thing keeping him upright. Sophie's bow faltered for half a beat. The stranger looked toward her. Even from 30 feet away, she felt the weight of his attention. He did not look confused. He looked alert, controlled. She told herself he was sick, exhausted, maybe injured in some ordinary accident. Then a dark drop struck the pale tile near his shoe. Another followed. Sophie stopped playing. The unfinished note hung in the tunnel and disappeared beneath the roar of an approaching train on the opposite track. The little girl in the red coat was pulled away. Other passengers glanced at the stranger, then quickly found reasons to look elsewhere. New Yorkers were skilled at protecting themselves with indifference. Sophie understood the instinct. She had learned it too. Keep moving. Do not stare. Do not become part of someone else's emergency. The board above the platform flashed 11 minutes. If she packed now, caught the final train, and ran the last 3 blocks home, she could submit her audition application before the deadline. She had spent 2 years preparing, 2 years teaching beginner lessons, playing weddings and performing underground until her fingers went numb. Missing the deadline meant waiting another season. The stranger took one more step. His knees gave way. He fell beside her violin case, scattering the neat pile of bills she had counted twice. Sophie lowered her instrument onto the bench and moved before fear could argue with her. "Sir, can you hear me?" She knelt a careful distance away. His face was pale beneath the harsh fluorescent light, but his eyes opened immediately. Grey, focused, far too aware for a man who had nearly collapsed. "Leave," he said. His voice was low, steady, and edged with an authority that made the word sound less like advice than an order. Sophie ignored it. She had taken emergency response classes. After her mother's first rule was simple: assess, call for help, keep the person calm. She reached for her phone. His hand closed around her wrist, not roughly, but with enough strength to stop her. "No police." "You need an ambulance." "No police," he repeated. Sophie looked at the hand pressed against his side. She did not need details to understand that he was losing strength. She unwound the wool scarf from her neck, folded it, and guided his hand over it. "Hold this firmly. You should go, and you should stop giving orders while lying on a subway floor." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. It vanished too quickly for her to be sure. The digital board flashed 10 minutes. Sophie turned toward the nearest commuters. "Call 911, please." A man in a Yankees cap the phone but hesitated when the stranger spoke again. "They're coming." The words were quieter now. Sophie leaned closer. "Who is coming?" His gaze moved past her toward the staircase. The station seemed to change around them. The air felt still. The usual noise continued, but beneath it Sophie heard another sound. Several pairs of shoes descending the steps in measured unison, not rushing, not uncertain. Whoever was approaching already knew where to go. The stranger's eyes returned to hers. "Take your violin and get on the train." Sophie glanced at her instrument, then at the open case beside him. Something small and black rested near the torn inner lining, but before she could identify it, he shifted, blocking her view. Twice. The footsteps drew closer. Sophie's heartbeat began matching the warning chime of the arriving train. She could still leave. The doors would open in seconds. She could step inside, return to the life she understood, and let someone else handle the danger gathering at the edge of the platform. Then the stranger's grip loosened. His eyes began to close. Sophie caught his shoulder and forced her voice to remain steady. "Stay with me. Listen to the rhythm." She tapped 4 slow beats against the tile. "Count." His lips barely moved. 1. The wind from the tunnel swept scattered dollar bills across the floor. 2. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. 3. Sophie looked toward the approaching train, then back at the man whose life had somehow fallen into her hands. She had no idea who he was. She only knew everyone else had stepped away. Sophie tightened the scarf, reached for her violin case, and made her choice. The stranger opened his eyes one final time and whispered, "Don't let them find the violin." The train roared into the station, pushing cold air across the platform and sending the loose bills from Sophie's violin case sliding beneath the bench. For one sharp second, she saw the open doors as an escape. Warm light, empty seats, a life that still made sense. Then the footsteps reached the bottom of the staircase. 2 men appeared beneath the flickering sign, both dressed in dark coats, both scanning the platform with the calm focus of people who were not looking for directions. Sophie lowered her head and wrapped one arm around the stranger's shoulders. "Can you stand?" she whispered. His eyes opened only halfway. "Not far. Far is not the goal." The train doors chimed. Passengers stepped out, moving around them in a hurried stream. Sophie used the crowd as cover, pulling the man toward a grey service door set into the tiled wall 20 feet away. He tried to help, but most of his weight leaned against her. He was heavier than she expected. Solid every step made his breathing tighten. Behind them, one of the men called out, "Sir, are you all right?" The politeness in his voice sounded rehearsed. Sophie did not turn around. "Almost there," she murmured. The service door had a keypad beside it. Locked, her pulse stumbled. The stranger lifted one hand and pressed 4 numbers without looking. The lock clicked. Sophie pushed the door open, guided him inside, and pulled it shut just before the train began moving again. The small room smelled of dust, old wiring, and damp concrete. Shelves crowded the walls. A narrow metal ladder disappeared into darkness above. Sophie slid the bolt into place and helped the stranger sit against a cabinet. "Who are they?" she asked. "Not friends. That much I understood." She checked the scarf at his side. He was still conscious, but the color had drained further from his face. "You need medical help now. My people are coming. Your people are late." A sound struck the other side of the door. Not hard, just a testing push. Sophie froze. The stranger looked toward the entrance, every trace of weakness disappearing from his even though his body had not recovered. "Turn off the light." Sophie found the switch. Darkness swallowed the room. Only a thin line of fluorescent glow slipped beneath the door. Another quiet push followed, then a voice. "We know you came through here." Sophie's fingers tightened around the handle of her violin case. The stranger shifted as if preparing to stand. She placed a hand against his shoulder. "Do not. Move away from the door. You can barely sit up. Sophie." She went still. She had never told him her name. He must have seen it on the small printed card inside her open case. That explanation should have comforted her. It did not. "How do you know who I am? Your case." His answer came without hesitation. "Good. At least you are observant." A faint sound came from the hallway, followed by the electronic chirp of someone trying the keypad. Sophie looked around the dark room. No second door, no window, only shelves, pipes, and the ladder. "Where does that go?" she whispered. "Maintenance corridor. Can it reach another platform? If the gate upstairs is open, and if it is not, then we improvise." Sophie almost laughed, but fear held the sound in her throat. She placed the violin case over her shoulder, then crouched beside him. "You are climbing. You should leave me here." That stopped being an option when someone called me optional. For the first time since he fell beside her case, the stranger looked at her without issuing an order. His gaze held something quieter now, recognition perhaps. Or respect. Every word. The keypad beeped again. Sophie guided his arm over her shoulders. Together they reached the ladder. She climbed first, testing each metal rung, then helped him follow. The space above was narrow and smelled of rust. She moved slowly, listening to his breathing and the sounds below. Halfway up, the service door opened. Light poured into the room beneath them. "Empty," one man said. "Check above." Sophie's heart struck hard against her ribs. She climbed faster. At the top, she found a square hatch and pushed. It resisted. She pushed again. Nothing. "Locked?" the stranger asked below her. "Stuck." Footsteps crossed the room beneath the ladder. Sophie braced one shoulder against the hatch and forced upward with everything she had. It shifted. An inch. Then another cold air rushed through the gap. She lifted it high enough to crawl into the corridor and turned back. The stranger reached for her hand. Sophie pulled until he cleared the opening, then lowered the hatch silently. They sat in darkness for one breath, then two. Somewhere below, a man began climbing. Sophie looked down the corridor. A red emergency light glowed at the far end. "Can you walk?" she asked. The stranger rose with the help of the wall. "For a minute. Then we only need 50 seconds. They moved toward the red light as the ladder rattled behind them. The corridor ended at another locked gate. Sophie searched for a release, finding only an old alarm box beneath a clear plastic cover. The stranger leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on the shadows behind them. "Break it," he said. Sophie lifted the hard edge of her violin case and struck the cover once. The plastic cracked. She pulled the alarm. A bell exploded through the tunnel, loud enough to shake the air. Red lights began flashing. As transit workers shouted over radios, the men behind them stopped climbing. Sophie pushed through the unlocked gate with the stranger beside her. At the far end of the corridor, uniformed station employees were running toward the alarm. The danger behind them retreated into silence. Sophie finally allowed herself to breathe. Then the stranger's strength gave out again. She caught him before he reached the floor. Outside, tires stopped hard against the curb above the station. Several car doors opened almost at once. Heavy footsteps rushed down the stairs, faster and more organized than the first group. Sophie tightened her grip on the violin case. The stranger lifted his head and listened, he said. Seconds later, a broad-shouldered man in a charcoal suit appeared at the corridor entrance with 3 others behind him. He looked first at the stranger, then at Sophie, then at the scarf pressed against the man's side. His face changed. "Luciano," he said, lowering his voice with unmistakable respect. Sophie felt the name settle into the corridor like a warning she should have understood. The stranger beside her was not simply wealthy, he was not simply dangerous, he was Dante Luciano. The name did not mean anything to Sophie at first. It was only a name spoken with respect by a man who looked as though he had never needed to repeat himself. Then she noticed the reaction of the transit workers. One of them stopped mid-sentence. Another lowered his radio. Even the air seemed to change around Dante Luciano, as if everyone present had recognized a danger Sophie had not yet learned to name. The broad-shouldered man in the charcoal suit crossed the corridor in 3 quick steps. "We have a vehicle outside," he said. "The doctor is waiting," but his weight shifted against Sophie again. The man reached for him. Sophie did not move aside. "He needs emergency care," she said. "He has been losing strength for several minutes." The man looked at her hand pressed over the scarf, then at Dante. "Who is she?" "The reason I am still standing," Dante answered. His voice was weaker than before, but the authority remained. 2 more men appeared behind Marco, both alert, both watching every entrance. Sophie recognized the pattern now. They were not simply friends, they moved like a shield that had arrived too late and intended never to make that mistake again. "An ambulance is already on the way," Sophie said. Marco's expression tightened. "It will not be fast enough." "Then call the hospital and have them meet us." "We are not going to a hospital." Sophie turned toward Dante. "You private clinic," he said. "Surgeon on site." "That sounds convenient. It is safer." The word made her look toward the dark corridor behind them. Safer for whom, she wanted to ask, but footsteps and shouted instructions echoed from the station entrance. Transit security had begun clearing the area. Marco glanced toward the sound. "We need to move." Sophie helped guide Dante through the corridor, refusing to release the pressure at his side until another man took over with steady hands. They emerged near a service stairwell that opened onto a side street. Rain shone beneath the city lights. 3 black sport utility vehicles waited at the curb, engines running. There were no flashing lights, no sirens, only quiet efficiency. A man opened the rear door of the middle vehicle. Inside, Sophie saw medical equipment, clean towels, and a woman in dark blue scrubs preparing supplies. That detail eased part of her fear, only part. "Come with us," Marco said. Sophie stepped back. "No." Dante paused at the vehicle. His face had gone almost grey, but his eyes remained fixed on her. "You are not safe alone." "Neither are you, apparently." Marco looked ready to object, but Dante lifted one hand. The movement was small. Everyone stopped. "Take her home," Dante said. "No detours, no questions, no one enters her building." Sophie felt irritation cut through the fear. "You do not get to decide where I go." Dante held her gaze for one long second, then decided quickly. Behind them, transit officers were approaching the street. A camera turned toward the vehicles. Marco opened the door of the first sport utility vehicle. "Miss Turner, you can ride with us or explain this entire night to a dozen people before the men from the platform return." Sophie hated that he was right. She also hated that Dante knew her last name. Then she remembered the printed card inside her violin case and forced herself to breathe. "I am going home," she said. "Only home." Only home, Marco agreed. Dante entered the medical vehicle. Before the door closed, he looked at Sophie's violin case. Keep it with you. The words landed strangely after everything that had happened. She tightened her grip on the handle. I always do. The vehicle pulled away first. Sophie watched its taillights disappear through the rain, then climbed into the second car. Marco sat across from her. The interior smelled of leather and coffee. No one spoke as they moved through Lower Manhattan. Sophie stared at her reflection in the dark window, barely recognizing the pale face looking back. Her hair had come loose, her hands trembled. The wool scarf she had worn for 3 winters was gone. So was the last train. So was her audition deadline. $86 still separated her from the life she had been working toward, but the number felt absurd now. Marco finally broke the silence. You should not tell anyone what happened tonight. Sophie looked at him. Was that advice or a threat? Advice. You people have a strange way of giving it. Something almost like regret crossed his face. You saved his life. Then perhaps someone should tell me why people were trying to find him. That is not my story to tell. Convenient again. The car stopped outside Sophie's apartment building in Brooklyn just before 1 in the morning. Marco stepped out first and scanned the street. Sophie followed with her violin case held close. No one comes upstairs, she said. My door. Marco glanced toward the parked vehicle. Across the street? No. For the first time he looked uncertain. Mr. Luciano gave an order. Mr. Luciano is not my landlord. Marco studied her, then gave a single nod. Someone will remain several blocks away. You will not see them. Sophie opened her mouth to argue, but exhaustion won. That is still following me. Tonight it is the compromise. She walked inside without answering. Her third-floor apartment was quiet except for the old radiator ticking beneath the window. Sophie locked the door, set the violin case on the kitchen table, and stood still until the silence stopped feeling like another threat. The water turned cold before she realized she was still staring at her fingers. At last she returned to the case. One latch was bent. The lining near the lower compartment had torn. She opened it carefully, checking the violin first. No cracks. One string had snapped, but the body was intact. Then she saw the object caught beneath the damaged lining. Small, black, shaped like a chess knight. Sophie pulled it free and held it beneath the kitchen light. A universal serial bus drive. A dark stain marked one corner. Dante's final words returned to her with sudden clarity. Keep it with you. Sophie looked toward the locked door. Somewhere in the city, Dante Luciano was being treated in a private clinic. Somewhere else, the men from the station were searching for what had vanished beside her violin case. She closed her hand around the drive and understood that the danger had not followed her home. It had arrived before she did. Sophie did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the black drive hidden beneath an overturned coffee mug and listened to every sound in the building. Pipes knocked inside the walls. Someone dragged a chair across the apartment above hers. A delivery truck groaned to a stop on the street below. Each ordinary noise arrived sharpened by fear. At 2:15 in the morning, she turned off every light except the one above the stove. At 3, she checked the lock for the 4th time. By 4:30, the sky beyond the fire escape had begun to soften from black to grey, and she had made a decision. She would not plug the drive into her laptop. She would not call the number on the transit officer's card. She would not pretend the object did not exist. Instead, she wrapped it in a clean dish towel, placed it inside the small plastic container that held her violin rosin, and tucked the container beneath 3 packages of frozen vegetables in the back of her freezer. It was not a perfect hiding place. It was simply the best one she had before sunrise. At 6:45, Sophie opened her audition portal. The deadline had passed 45 minutes earlier. A red message filled the screen. Applications closed. Her throat tightened. For 2 years, she had arranged every dollar, every shift, every lesson around that opportunity. Now it was gone because she had stopped for a stranger whose name made trained men lower their voices. Sophie shut the laptop before anger could become tears. At 8, someone knocked on her door. 3 measured taps. Sophie froze beside the kitchen counter. Miss Turner, a woman called. New York Police Department. Sophie looked through the peephole. A woman in a navy coat stood beside a uniformed officer. No one else was visible in the hall. Sophie opened the door but left the chain in place. The detective introduced herself as Elena Ruiz and asked about the alarm at Fulton Street Station. Sophie answered carefully. Yes, a man had collapsed. Yes. 2 unknown men had entered the platform. No, she had not seen a weapon clearly. No, she did not know where the injured man had gone. Detective Ruiz watched her with the patience of someone accustomed to partial truths. "Did he give you anything?" she asked. Sophie's pulse moved into her throat. "No. Did you pick up anything that belonged to him?" "Only my own case." The detective glanced toward the violin on the table. "The station cameras lost their feed for 6 minutes. That does not happen by accident." Sophie held her expression still. "I pulled the fire alarm. Perhaps that affected something. Perhaps." Ruiz handed her a card. "Call me if you remember more." Sophie waited until the officers had left the building before locking the door. Her hands were steady now, but not because she felt safe. She had just lied to the police. That realization followed her for the rest of the morning. She replaced the broken string on her violin, cleaned the bow, and tried to play. The first note came out thin. The second broke completely. At 11:17, her phone rang from an unknown number. Sophie let it ring twice before answering. "Miss Turner," a man said. His voice was smooth, older, unfamiliar. "I am calling on behalf of Dante Luciano." She said nothing. "Mr. Luciano is awake. He would like to thank you personally. Then he can send a card." A quiet pause followed. "He also believes you may have something that belongs to him." Sophie looked toward the freezer. "I do not." "Of course." The man sounded almost amused. "A car will arrive in 20 minutes. Do not send one." It sounds exactly like one. Then allow me to rephrase. There are people looking for you who will not ask politely. Mr. Luciano would prefer to reach you first. The call ended before Sophie could respond. 19 minutes later, a black sedan stopped across the street. Marco stepped out alone. He did not approach the building. He simply waited beside the car, hands visible, giving her the choice he had promised the night before. Sophie watched from behind the curtain for nearly a minute. Then she took her violin case, left the drive in the freezer, and went downstairs. Marco opened the rear door without speaking. "I am not being taken anywhere against my will," she said. "You are going to a restaurant in Midtown, public place, your choice of table, and if I decide to leave, I drive you home." Sophie studied his face. "No detours, no detours." The restaurant occupied the first floor of a quiet hotel near Bryant Park. Dante sat in a private corner, but not behind closed doors. Morning light stretched across the table. He wore a dark suit, though his movements were slower than before. A glass of water rested untouched near his hand. Sophie stopped several feet away. He rose despite the discomfort it caused him. "You missed your audition deadline," he said. Anger replaced surprise. "You investigated me. I asked who saved my life. That was not permission to examine mine." Dante lowered himself into the chair. "Sit, please." His gaze moved to the violin case in her hand. "The drive fell into the torn lining when I collapsed." Sophie said nothing. "It contains evidence that someone inside my company betrayed me. Then report it. Some of the people who should receive that report may already be compromised. That is not my problem. It became your problem when the station cameras recorded you leaving with the case." Sophie felt the room narrow around her. "You said the cameras went dark. For 6 minutes, not 4, not after." Dante did not threaten her. That made his calm more unsettling. "Give it to me and I will make certain you are protected." "I do not have it." His eyes remained on hers. Then he reached out and touched the torn edge of the violin case with 2 fingers. "Keep lying if it makes you feel safer," he said quietly, "but someone else already knows you have it." Sophie kept one hand on the violin case and the other at her side. Protection is not the same as control. Dante's expression remained unreadable, but the room around him seemed to listen. Even the waiter approaching with coffee slowed before deciding to turn away. "Agreed," he said. The word surprised her more than an argument would have. Sophie pulled out the chair across from him but did not sit immediately. "Then we set rules." Marco, standing several feet away, shifted his attention toward her. Dante did not. "Go on." Sophie placed the violin case beside her chair and sat. "No one enters my apartment, no one follows me into my building, no one speaks to my landlord, my neighbors, or the people I teach." "You teach? Beginner violin lessons. That is not the point." "It may become the point if someone uses your schedule to find you. Then tell me when there is a real threat. Do not rearrange my life without asking." Dante rested one hand near the untouched glass of water. His movements were controlled, but Sophie noticed the slight pause before he shifted in his chair. He was still hurting. She refused to let that soften the boundaries she needed. "Second," she continued, "no expensive gifts, no new apartment, no envelope of cash, and no mysterious favors. I have not offered and you are about to." A faint change touched the corner of his mouth, not a smile, almost one. "And third, no lies about anything that can put me in danger." Dante looked toward the window. Outside, Pedestrians moved along the sidewalk beneath bright winter sunlight, unaware of the conversation taking place 20 feet away. That rule goes both ways. Sophie met his eyes. Then prove the police cannot be trusted. I cannot prove a negative. You can prove why you believe it. He studied her for several seconds. The drive contains financial records, private schedules, and coded payments. Someone used those records to arrange the attack at the station. A detective assigned to a related investigation received money from one of the shell companies named in the files. Detective Ruiz's calm face returned to Sophie's mind. Do you know which detective? Not yet. Then you do not know if the woman who came to my apartment is involved. No, that means I may have lied to an honest officer because you told me the system was compromised. You lied because you were afraid. Do not explain my choices to me. Dante's gaze sharpened, then lowered slightly. Fair. The answer unsettled her again. Men who carried authority the way he did were not supposed to accept correction so easily. Perhaps he was only being strategic. Perhaps every calm response was another method of control. Sophie leaned back. I will not give you the drive until I know handing it over will not make me disappear from the story. You believe I would harm you after you saved me. I believe I do not know you. That is honest. It is also sensible. Dante nodded once. Keep it for now. Marco turned his head. Dante. It was the first time Sophie had heard him use the first name. The concern in it was quiet but unmistakable. Dante raised one finger. Marco fell silent. She keeps the drive, Dante said. We secure a copy once she agrees. Sophie watched the exchange carefully. You are accepting my terms, most of them. Which one are you rejecting? The one about following you. Her shoulders tightened. Then this conversation is over. Visible protection can stop. Surveillance from a distance cannot. That is still surveillance. Yes, he did not soften the word. The men who came for me saw you. If they believe you have the drive, they will not respect your rules. And I am supposed to trust yours. No, you are supposed to test them. Dante reached into his coat slowly and placed a small card on the table. It held one telephone number and no name. Call that number at any hour. You choose the route, the meeting place, and whether Marco comes alone. If anyone else arrives, you walk away. Sophie looked at the card but did not touch it. That sounds less like trust and more like procedure. Trust begins with procedure when fear is involved. The sentence carried a weight that felt older than the night before. Sophie wondered who had taught him that lesson and what it had cost. She pushed the thought aside. My violin case was damaged because of your emergency. I noticed. I need it repaired. Only repaired, not replaced. Understood. And I choose the shop. Understood. This time, the almost smile returned for half a second. You expected me to argue. I expected you to buy the entire music store. That would be inefficient. That means you considered it. Dante reached for his water. Briefly. Sophie shook her head despite herself. The tension in her chest loosened by a fraction. A waiter approached again, this time with a fresh cup of coffee for Sophie. She had not ordered it. She looked at Dante. No gifts. It is coffee. It is still something I did not ask for. Dante looked at the waiter. Take it back. The waiter blinked, then lifted the cup without question. Sophie watched him leave. You really do not like being told no, she said. I am learning to recognize the word. You should practice more often. Perhaps you will provide opportunities. The reply was dry, almost human. Sophie caught herself before amusement could become comfort. There is one more condition. Say it. My missed audition. You do not fix it. His eyes narrowed slightly. Why not? Because it was my opportunity. If I earn another one, it will be mine too. You lost it saving my life. That was my choice. Dante leaned back, and for the first time since she entered, he looked at her as though he was not solving a problem. He was trying to understand one. Most people would ask me to replace what they lost. Most people probably know what you can do for them. And you do not. Sophie glanced at the men positioned near the restaurant entrance, the waiting car outside, the silence that followed his smallest gesture. I know exactly what I'm being careful. Dante lowered his gaze to the violin case. The repair shop. When? This afternoon. Marco will drive. Marco can follow from 2 blocks away. 1 block, 2. Dante considered it. 1.5. Sophie stared at him. That is not how city blocks work. The almost smile finally became visible. It changed his face only slightly, but enough to reveal the man beneath the control, then too. Sophie picked up the card and slipped it into her coat pocket. She stood, lifting the violin case with her. Dante rose as well, slower this time. There is something else, he said. Sophie paused. He touched the edge of the case near the damaged latch, then withdrew his hand. His fingers had settled naturally along the wood, curved with the quiet precision of someone familiar with strings and balance. Not a collector, not a casual listener, a player. Sophie looked from his hand to his face. You know how to hold a violin. Dante's expression closed again, but not before she saw the memory pass through it. I used to. Sophie carried Dante's final words with her through the afternoon. I used to. He had said them without pride and without explanation, as though the memory belonged to a locked room he had no intention of opening. The violin repair shop stood on West 24th Street between a bakery and a narrow bookstore, its brass bell ringing when Sophie pushed through the door. Warm air smelled of varnish, cedar, and old paper. Mr. Levin looked up from his workbench, adjusted his glasses, and frowned when he saw the damaged latch. What happened, he asked. The case had a difficult night. The violin, one broken string, nothing worse. He inspected the instrument beneath a bright lamp, turning it carefully in his hands. Sophie watched every movement. The violin had belonged to her grandfather before it became hers, and she trusted very few people to touch it. Through the front window, she could see Marco standing half a block away beneath a dark awning. Dante had kept his agreement. No one had entered the shop with her. No one had spoken to Mr. Levin. The protection remained visible only because Sophie knew where to look. Mr. Levin replaced the string, repaired the latch, and reinforced the torn lining. When he asked about payment, Sophie reached for her wallet. Already covered, he said. Her hand stopped. By whom? A gentleman called this morning. Anger rose fast and clean. Sophie looked through the window again. Marco was speaking into his phone. Cancel it, she said. Miss Turner, the invoice has been settled. Then refund him. Mr. Levin raised both hands. I repair instruments. I do not negotiate with mysterious gentlemen. Sophie paid the amount herself and made him write a receipt. She walked outside, carrying the repaired case in one hand and the receipt in the other. Marco saw her expression and ended his call. He was told not to pay for this. Dante thought he was correcting a problem he caused. He was ignoring a rule I made. Marco glanced at the receipt. You plan to tell him. I plan to make him listen. Dante's residence occupied the upper floors of a converted limestone building near Central Park. Sophie had expected gates, marble statues, and men guarding every doorway. Instead, the entrance was quiet, almost severe, dark wood, pale stone, nothing displayed without purpose. Marco led her upstairs to a library lined with books and tall windows. Dante stood near the fireplace in a charcoal sweater, one hand resting against the mantel. He had changed from the formal suit, but the room still seemed organized around him. You paid for the repair, Sophie said. She placed the receipt on the desk between them. Dante looked at it. The case was damaged because of me. That does not change what I said. You needed it repaired. I handled it. You should not have to pay for damage connected to my problem. Then you should have asked. Silence held for a moment. Dante picked up the receipt and studied it as though it were evidence in a case he had misjudged. You are right. Sophie had prepared for resistance. The apology left her with nowhere to direct the anger. That sounded painful, she said. It was unfamiliar. Marco turned away, but Sophie caught the brief movement at the corner of his mouth. Dante placed the receipt in a drawer. I will not do it again. Good. Sophie set the case on a low table. Now tell me about the violin. Dante's gaze shifted toward the instrument. To tell. You held the case correctly. Your fingers curved before you touched it. People who only listen do not do that. You observe too much. That complaint is rich coming from you. She opened the case and lifted the violin. The polished wood caught the afternoon light. Hold it. Dante did not move. No, that was quick. You wanted me to practice recognizing the word. Sophie almost smiled. I also said no lies. You told me there was nothing to tell. Dante looked toward the window. The city beyond it seemed distant. Reduced to silent traffic, he said at last. Professionally, before she married my father. And she taught you, his jaw tightened slightly, for 6 years. Why did you stop? The room became still. Sophie sensed the boundary only after she had crossed it. Dante's hand closed around the edge of the mantel. She died when I was 14. Sophie lowered the violin. I am sorry. People say that when they have nothing else to offer, sometimes there is nothing else. He looked at her then. The hardness in his expression remained, but something behind it had shifted. She played the same piece you were playing in the station, Meditation, every Sunday morning. His voice had lost its command. It sounded quieter, shaped by a boy who had once known music before he learned control. After she died, I put her violin away, because it reminded you of her, because it reminded me that I could not protect her. Sophie held his gaze. Music did not betray you, Dante. People did. The sentence landed harder than she intended. He turned away, but not before she saw the pain move across face. She did not apologize. Some truths hurt because they reached the place built to avoid them. Sophie extended the violin toward him. One note. I have not played in 20 years. Then it will be a bad note. You make that sound acceptable. Bad notes are honest. Silence can pretend to be anything. Dante looked at the instrument for a long moment before taking it. His hands found their positions without instruction. Left hand beneath the neck, chin resting carefully, shoulder lowered. Memory had survived even if practice had not. Sophie placed the bow in his right hand. Do not force it. He drew the bow across the string. The note came out rough, thin, and uneven. Dante stopped immediately, he said. Accurate. You enjoy this? A little. He tried again. The second note held longer. It was not beautiful, but it was steady. Sophie watched his expression soften by 1 degree. Then close when footsteps entered the library. Marco carried a laptop and a printed sheet covered in numbers and unfamiliar symbols. We accessed part of the drive, he said. Dante lowered the violin. And the financial records are encrypted. Whoever created the code disguised the key as musical notation. Sophie set the bow down and took the page. Measures, rests, and note names appeared between strings of numbers. At first they looked random. Then she noticed the repeated pattern, 4 beats, a pause. The same structure Dante's mother had used to teach counting in meditation. Sophie looked up. This is not random. Dante's face hardened. Can you read it? Not all of it yet. She traced one sequence with her finger. But I know where to start. Marco turned the laptop toward her. Sophie matched the note values to the payment dates. One name emerged from the first decoded line, followed by the account of a company Dante owned. The payment had been sent 48 hours before the attack. Dante stared at the screen. That company is controlled from inside my office. Sophie felt the room grow colder. The men at the station had not been hired by a distant rival. Someone standing close enough to know Dante's schedule had paid them with his own money. By the following evening, Sophie had decoded enough of the drive to prove one thing with certainty. The betrayal had begun inside Dante's own organization. 3 names appeared repeatedly beside coded transfers and altered schedules. One belonged to a regional manager Sophie had never heard of. One belonged to Marco. The third belonged to Victor Hale, Dante's senior financial advisor, and the man who had managed Luciano business accounts for nearly 2 decades. Dante did not react when Sophie read the names aloud. He simply stood at the end of the library table, one hand resting near the violin she had left in its open case. Marco, however, went still. You think I am involved, he said. Sophie looked at him carefully. I think the code wants us to think you are involved. Dante's eyes shifted toward her. Explain. She turned the laptop around. The entries tied to Marco are too obvious. Same initials, same approval pattern, same routes he actually uses. Whoever created this wanted the records to survive a quick review and point directly at him. Marco exhaled through his nose. That does not clear me. No, Sophie said, but it makes me suspicious of whoever designed the trap. Dante studied the screen. Victor is coming to dinner tonight. You already invited him? Before we decoded the names, cancel it. No. His answer came quietly, but the room seemed to tighten around it. If Victor is innocent, cancelling warns the guilty person that we found something. If he is not innocent, I want to see what he notices. Sophie folded her arms. And you want me there. You understand the code better than anyone in this room. That is not the same as being bait. Dante's expression changed by a fraction. You will not be bait. Then what am I? A musician invited to dinner. That sounds worse when you say it. Marco nearly smiled, but Dante remained serious. You choose where you sit. You leave whenever you want. No one blocks the door. Sophie considered the offer. Every instinct told her to walk away, yet the memory of Victor's name beside the payments would not let her. Someone had followed Dante into the subway. Someone knew about her violin case. Someone had already reached into her life. Leaving the room would not remove her from the truth. I stay near the exit, she said, and I keep my phone. Agreed. Dinner was held in a long dining room overlooking Central Park. The table was polished dark wood set for 5, though only 4 people sat. Dante took the head. Marco sat to his right. Sophie chose the chair closest to the doors. Victor Hale arrived exactly at 7. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, carefully dressed, with the kind of pleasant expression that made people reveal more than they intended. He greeted Dante with concern, Marco with familiarity, and Sophie with a pause that lasted 1 second too long. Miss Turner, he said, I have heard about your courage. Sophie did not remember anyone introducing her. Have you? Victor smiled. News travels quickly in this house. His gaze moved to the violin case resting beside her chair, and music travels even faster. The meal began with ordinary conversation, company earnings, insurance claims, a board meeting delayed by weather. Victor spoke with calm precision, never appearing hurried, never asking directly about the attack. That restraint made Sophie watch him more closely. He knew too much about the schedule Dante had followed that night. He knew which clinic had treated him. He knew Sophie had been at the station, yet every question arrived disguised as concern. The police must have frightened you, Victor said. They asked questions. Did you tell them everything? Sophie lifted her water glass. I told them what I understood. Very careful. Across the table, Dante said nothing. Sophie could feel his attention without looking at him. After the main course, Dante asked her to play. The request had been planned. She opened the case, lifted the violin, and placed a page of copied notation on the music stand near the window. The page included one altered measure from the encoded sequence. The original pattern required a minor third followed by a rest. Sophie played a major third instead, then stopped as if uncertain. That does not sound right, Victor said. The correction came too quickly. Silence settled lowered the bow. Which part? Victor glanced toward the page. The transition, it should descend before the rest. Marco's hand stopped beside his glass. Dante remained motionless. Sophie looked at the notation again. There is no written dissent. Victor's pleasant expression did not disappear. It only became more careful. Then perhaps I misheard. You named the exact correction, Sophie said. Most people would only say it sounded wrong. Victor leaned back. My mother insisted on piano lessons. This is not piano notation. The air changed, not loudly. No one raised a voice, yet Sophie felt the balance in the room shift. Victor's eyes moved from her to Dante. You brought her into this, he asked. She was brought into it at Fulton Street, Dante replied. For the first time, Victor's control slipped. His fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. You should have destroyed the drive. Sophie's pulse struck hard. Marco stood. So you knew about it, Dante said. Victor recovered quickly. I know enough to understand that damaged records create dangerous misunderstandings. Sophie set the violin down. You knew the code before seeing the drive. Victor turned toward her. The warmth had left his face. Miss Turner, courage is admirable until it becomes interference. Dante rose then, slowly but fully, and every person in the room seemed to move around that decision. Careful, Victor. Victor looked at him, then back at Sophie. His smile returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. He stepped closer as though examining the violin, stopping just far enough away to remain polite. You should have taken the last train, he said softly. Sophie felt the words settle into place with all the others from that night. The station, the men, the drive, the damaged schedule. Victor Hale had not merely recognized the code. He had known exactly where she was supposed to disappear. Sophie did not move until Victor had left the room. The front doors closed somewhere beyond the dining hall, followed by the low murmur of men speaking in the entryway. Marco waited for Dante's signal before following. Sophie remained beside the violin, one hand resting on the case, every nerve sharpened by the sentence Victor had whispered. You should have taken the last train. It was not a guess, it was memory. He knew, she said. Dante looked toward the doorway Victor had used. Yes, his voice had gone colder, but not louder. Then why did you let him leave? Because knowing is not proving. He threatened me in your dining room, and if I move too early, the rest of the network disappears. Sophie stared at him. You are still thinking like this is only a business problem. Dante turned back to her. It stopped being only business when they followed you home, then stop deciding what risk I am allowed to take. The words struck the space between them. Dante said nothing. Sophie closed the violin case and fastened the repaired latch. Victor knows I can read the code. He knows I have seen enough to become dangerous to him. Sitting in this house and waiting will not make me safer. No, Dante said. It will make you easier to protect. That is not the same thing. It may be the only thing that matters tonight. Sophie lifted the case to you. She walked toward the door. Dante's voice stopped her. Where are you going? Back to the station? No, Sophie turned. There is the word you enjoy so much. You are not returning to the place where this began. That is exactly why I should. Dante's expression hardened. Explain. Sophie set the case down again. Victor believes the drive is hidden in the violin. He also believes I am frightened enough to disappear. If I go back to Fulton Street and perform, he has to decide whether I am careless, confident, or setting a trap. Any reaction gives us information. It also gives him a clear location, a public location, cameras, transit police, commuters, witnesses. Public does not mean safe, neither does this house. He walked in here carrying your trust like a key. Dante's jaw tightened. Sophie saw the truth land. Victor had not broken through a wall. He had already been inside it. Marco returned, closing the doors behind him. Victor's car left heading uptown, he said. 2 of our people are following. She wants to perform at the station. Marco's eyes narrowed. Tonight? Tomorrow evening, Sophie said. During rush hour. That is too exposed, Marco replied. That is the point. She opened the case and took out the rosin container. We use a false drive. Victor will think the real one is here. We place cameras where he cannot see them and watch who approaches. Dante looked at the container in her hand. The real drive is inside that? Not anymore. Marco glanced at her. Where is it? Somewhere neither of you knows. Dante's eyes held hers. You moved it after the police came to my apartment without telling us. No lies about direct danger. That was the rule, not a promise to report every decision. For a moment instead, Dante gave a slow nod. Good. Marco looked surprised. Sophie was too. Good, she asked. If Victor compromises one of us, he cannot take what we do not know. The answer changed the balance of the room. Dante was not trying to reclaim control. He was adapting. We still need a decoy, Sophie said. Marco opened the laptop bag and removed a blank universal serial bus drive. That can be arranged. The plan took shape over the next hour. An investigator named Rachel Monroe, who had been reviewing Luciano financial records under a federal cooperation agreement, would place 2 discrete cameras inside the station. Marco would position security near the entrances. Dressed as commuters, Dante would remain out of sight. Sophie rejected that final part immediately. If Victor expects this to matter to you, he will look for you. Then he will not see me, which tells him it is a trap. Dante studied the station map spread across the table. You want me visible, not beside me in the crowd. That creates unnecessary risk. Sophie pointed to the center platform. You asked me to test your rules. I am asking you to test mine. Silence followed. Marco waited. Dante looked at the map, then at Sophie. I stand where you can see me and where Victor can, agreed. The next evening, Fulton Street Station sounded exactly as it always had. Trains arrived. Announcements echoed overhead. Shoes rushed across tile. Sophie stood beneath the same flickering light with her violin beneath her chin and the repaired case open at her feet. This time the false drive rested beneath the lining where the real one had fallen. She began the unfinished piece from the night she met Dante. The first notes trembled, then steadied. Across the platform, Dante stood among commuters in a dark coat, no visible guards beside him. He looked like a stranger again. Only Sophie knew how much power was hidden beneath the stillness. She played through the first movement. No one approached. A woman dropped $1 into the case. A teenager recorded 10 seconds on his phone. Marco passed near the staircase without looking at her. Everything moved according to plan. Then Sophie reached the measure where the melody had stopped that first night. She glanced down. The rosin container remained in place. The lining looked untouched, but the false drive was gone. Her bow hesitated. Dante saw it. His eyes shifted toward the crowd. Sophie kept playing, forcing the music forward while cold realization settled through her. No one had come near the case since she opened it. Someone had taken the decoy before the performance began. Sophie finished the measure without letting the fear reach her hands. The melody continued across the platform while her mind moved faster than the bow. The false drive had been placed inside the torn lining less than an hour earlier. Only 5 people had known: Sophie, Dante, Marco, Rachel Monroe, and the technician who had installed the cameras. No stranger had touched the case since she entered the station. That meant the plan had been exposed before it began. She lifted her eyes toward Dante. He was already watching Marco, who stood near the staircase pretending to read a transit map. Rachel sat on a bench 20 feet away with a paper cup in her hands. The technician was nowhere in sight. Sophie played through the final phrase, then lowered the violin as commuters applauded politely and moved on. Dante crossed the platform without hurrying. "Do not look at the case," she said when he reached her. Too late. His voice remained calm, but his eyes searched the crowd. Who handled it? Marco placed the drive. Rachel checked the camera angle. The technician adjusted the microphone beneath the bench. Dante looked toward the opposite end of the platform. "Where is he?" Sophie followed his gaze. The maintenance door near the far staircase stood slightly open. It had been closed when they arrived. Marco approached from behind them. "The camera feed froze 9 minutes ago," he said. Rachel just confirmed it. Sophie closed the violin case. "Victor knew everything." "Or someone told him," Dante replied. Rachel joined them, her face tense. "The technician's name is Owen Price. Can you reach him?" Marco asked. "His phone is off." A train thundered into the station, filling the platform with wind and noise. A folded sheet of music skidded across the tile and stopped against Sophie's shoe. She stared at it. The paper had not been there a moment earlier. She picked it up carefully. Notes were written across the staff in black ink, but the pattern did not belong to any piece she recognized. 4 short notes, a rest, 2 descending intervals, then a repeated series of numbers beneath the final measure. Dante looked over her shoulder. "What is it? A message?" Sophie traced the pattern with one finger. "These are not notes for performance, they are coordinates." Marco took out his phone. Sophie read the numbers aloud. He entered them into a map and turned the screen toward them. An abandoned station beneath Lower Manhattan appeared, closed for more than 30 years. Said, "There are maintenance tunnels connecting it to active lines." Rachel looked at the lower corner of the page. There is more. 3 letters had been written beneath the final bar. MBL. Marco's face changed. "Marco Bell Luciano?" Sophie asked. "No," he said. "Marco Bell. The L is not mine." His phone vibrated. He answered, listened for 3 seconds, and went completely still. "Say that again." Dante's attention sharpened. Marco lowered the phone. "One of my men found my car in the garage, empty. My access badge is gone." Another message appeared on his screen, a photograph. Marco turned it toward them. It showed the inside of a dim concrete room. His jacket lay on the floor beside a metal chair. On the chair rested his personal watch, the one Sophie had seen him wear every day. Beneath the image were 6 words: "Bring the real drive, come alone." Sophie felt the meaning before anyone spoke. Victor wanted them to believe Marco had been taken, or perhaps he truly had another member of Marco's family. "Who is the L?" she asked. Marco swallowed. "Brother, Lucas. He works nights managing one of the shipping warehouses." Dante's expression hardened. "Victor took him." "We do not know that," Rachel said. "We know enough," Marco replied. Sophie looked back at the music. The final measure contained a sequence repeated 3 times. Not a location, a time. 10:30, she said. "Tonight." Dante checked his watch. 90 minutes. Marco stepped closer. "I am going." "That is what Victor expects," Dante said. "He asked for the drive and one person. He has my brother, which is why you are not thinking clearly." Marco's jaw tightened. "Would you?" The question landed heavily. Dante did not answer. Sophie folded the paper and placed it inside her coat. "We do not send Marco alone." Both men looked at her. "We do not send anyone alone," she continued. "Victor expects panic. He expects Dante to use force and Marco to ignore orders. We give him neither." Rachel glanced toward the closed maintenance door. "The abandoned station is narrow, unstable, and surrounded by old service lines. A direct entry would be dangerous." "Then we do not enter directly," Sophie said. "The coordinates are written as music because Victor knows I can read them. He wants me involved." Dante's eyes darkened. "No, he already involved me when he left this at my feet. You are not walking into that station." "I did not say I would walk in without a plan." She opened the case and removed the blank rosin container. "The real drive is not here." But Marco looked at her. "Where did you hide it? With someone Victor has no reason to connect to this." "Who?" Dante asked. Sophie held his gaze. "You told me trust begins with procedure. Here is the procedure. We retrieve the drive, create a second copy, and give Victor exactly enough truth to keep him talking. Rachel records everything. Marco enters through the service line. Dante stays where Victor can see him." "And you?" Dante asked. Sophie looked toward the departing train, then at the strange music in her hand. Dante's answer came immediately. "No." Sophie stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Victor built this message for me. If I do not appear, he knows it is a trap. If you rush the station, Lucas may not come out. You can order everyone in this city, Dante, but tonight that will not save him." Silence held between them. The station announcements continued overhead. People passed without noticing the 4 of them standing beside an open violin case. Sophie could see the conflict in Dante's face, not his thoughts, but the effort it took him not to decide for everyone. At last he looked down at the map, then back at her. "Tell me what you need." "I need 30 minutes, a second copy of the drive." "Access to the maintenance map and one promise," Sophie said. Dante stood across from her on the crowded platform, the noise of the station moving around them, while the 4 of them remained fixed inside a decision that could not be delayed. "What promise?" he asked. "No one moves early, not your people, not you." Marco looked toward the staircase. "Victor has Lucas. That is why he expects you to rush," Sophie said. "If you do exactly what he planned, he controls the timing." Rachel Monroe opened her tablet and pulled up the old transit diagrams. "There is a service entrance 2 blocks south. It connects to the lower tunnel but not directly to the abandoned platform." Sophie studied the map. "How close does it get?" "About 300 feet. Close enough for Marco to hear a signal. Rachel nodded. If the old speakers still work. Sophie looked at Dante. That is the second thing I need, access to the station's sound system. It has been disconnected for years, Marco said. Not all of it, Sophie replied. Old stations kept emergency circuits separate from passenger systems. If the wiring's intact, a microphone signal can still travel through the maintenance speakers. Dante watched her trace the route with her finger. You have done this before? No. That is not reassuring. I grew up around old concert halls. Dead wiring and bad acoustics are familiar problems. The corner of his mouth almost moved, but the seriousness remained. And the drive? Rachel asked. Sophie gave her an address in Queens. My former music professor, Helen Ward. I left the real drive at a sealed envelope between two sets of sheet music. She believes it is an application recording. Dante turned to Marco. Retrieve it with Rachel. No one else. Marco hesitated. And Lucas? We bring him home. The certainty in Dante's voice quieted the argument. 40 minutes later, Sophie stood inside a vacant office near the old City Hall station entrance. The room smelled of dust and heated wiring. A single work lamp cast long shadows across the walls. Rachel connected the real drive to an isolated laptop and created an encrypted copy. Marco placed the original inside a small protective sleeve, then slid it beneath the lining of Sophie's violin case. Victor will scan the case, he said. He will find it. He is supposed to. Sophie adjusted the tiny transmitter hidden beneath the collar of her coat. It was no larger than a shirt button. Rachel tested the signal. I can hear you. From how far? As long as the concrete does not block everything, several hundred feet. Dante stood near the door, silent. He had objected to every part of the plan once. Sophie had answered each objection. Now he watched her with the stillness he wore when control had become impossible and trust was the only choice left. The copy stays with Rachel, Sophie said. If Victor takes the original, the evidence survives. If he searches you, Dante asked, he finds the transmitter if he knows where to look. Then he cannot have time to look. Sophie closed the violin case. That depends on keeping him talking. And if he does not, then I play. Marco looked at her. That is the signal? 3 descending notes repeated twice. If you hear them through the station speakers, Victor has discovered the transmitter or moved Lucas. Dante stepped closer, stopping an arm's length away. You do not improvise beyond that. You do not give orders beyond that. His eyes held hers. Tonight I am asking. The difference mattered. Sophie nodded once. Then I agree. At 10:24, she entered the abandoned station alone. The tiled walls had faded beneath decades of dust. Old advertisements curled behind cracked glass. A row of dead lights hung above the platform, while 2 portable lamps illuminated the center. Victor stood beside an iron support column in a dark overcoat. Lucas Bell sat in a chair near the wall, alert but frightened, his hands secured with plastic ties. He did not appear injured. Relief moved through Sophie so sharply that she nearly lost the rhythm of her breathing. You came, Victor said. You wrote the invitation in music. I knew you would appreciate the effort. Sophie stopped 20 feet away. Let him go. After I confirm you brought what belongs to me. It belongs to Dante. Dante inherited many things he never understood. Victor's gaze moved to the violin case. Open it. Sophie set the case on a metal bench and lifted the lid. She removed the violin, then the rosin container, allowing him to see the protective sleeve beneath the lining. Victor's expression eased. Bring it here. You are in no position to negotiate. Then why am I still holding the drive? Silence settled over the platform. Somewhere beyond the walls, water dripped at a steady pace. Victor looked toward Lucas, then back at Sophie. You think Dante will save you. I think you need him to believe he still has a choice. Victor's face changed slightly. He never had one, not since his father ordered the attack that killed his mother. Sophie felt the words strike deeper than any threat. In her ear, Rachel's breathing stopped. That is not true, said, keeping her voice level. It is entirely true. His father feared she would take Dante away. I arranged the route, the car, the timing. Then I spent 20 years making certain the son blamed the wrong enemy. Sophie understood what Victor was doing. He wanted Dante to hear this. He wanted grief to become anger before the plan was complete. She looked toward the darkness beyond the platform and imagined Dante waiting somewhere inside it, hearing every word through the transmitter. Victor continued, Dante built his life around a lie I gave him. Loyalty, revenge, family, all useful tools when a boy is taught to obey before he learns to question. Sophie tightened her hand around the bow. And the attack at Fulton Street? A correction. He had begun cooperating with federal investigators. He mistook survival for redemption. Victor extended one hand. Now give me the drive. Sophie lifted the violin to her shoulder. First you release Lucas. "This is not a concert." "No," she said, placing the bow against the strings. "It is a confession." She drew the first note into the abandoned station. Clear, steady, the sound traveled into the dark tunnels. Victor's eyes narrowed. Sophie played the opening phrase of meditation, not as a signal, but as an ankante for the boy who had lost his mother and built an empire around the wrong truth. Victor took one step forward. "Stop," Sophie continued. The second phrase rose through the station. In her ear, Rachel whispered, "We have everything." Victor heard the faint sound. His gaze dropped to Sophie's collar. The warmth disappeared from his face. He reached toward her. Sophie changed the melody. 3 descending notes. Twice. The signal passed into the old speakers, echoing through the city beneath the city. Somewhere beyond the wall, metal scraped against concrete. Marco was moving. Dante was no longer waiting. The 3 descending notes were still echoing when the portable lights went dark. For one suspended second, the abandoned station became nothing but breath, dripping water, and the fading vibration of Sophie's lowest string. Victor's hand missed her collar as she stepped sideways, guided by the memory of where the bench had been. She lowered the violin, kept the bow in her right hand, and listened. Lucas shifted against the chair near the wall. Victor's shoes scraped across tile. Farther down the tunnel, a metal gate opened with a hard mechanical groan. "Sophie," Dante called from the darkness. His voice reached her from the left, closer than she expected. "I am here." "Lucas is against the north wall," she answered. 10 feet from the column. Victor seized the violin case from the bench. The latches snapped open. Sophie heard the protective sleeve slide free. "Stay where you are," Victor said, his calm what I came for. "You have evidence of your own confession," Sophie replied. "There is a copy." Silence followed. She could almost feel Victor calculating. "You are lying." "Did you really think I would trust only one recording?" A beam of white light appeared near the service tunnel. Marco entered first, holding a flashlight low. The beam found Lucas, then moved away at once. "I see him," Marco said. Another light appeared behind him. Rachel's voice came through Sophie's damaged transmitter, faint but clear. "Federal agents are at both exits." The confession was recorded. Victor backed toward the platform edge with the drive in one hand and Sophie's case in the other, he said. Dante stepped into the edge of Marco's light. He carried no visible weapon. His face looked carved from stillness, but Sophie saw the effort beneath it. He had heard Victor admit the truth about his mother. He had heard the foundations of his life break apart in "Release Lucas," Dante said. Victor laughed once without warmth. "Still giving orders. Your father would be proud." Dante stopped several yards away. "My father is dead. His choices end tonight." "His choices made you." "No, they trapped me." Sophie heard the change in Dante's voice, not weakness, clarity. Victor lifted the drive. "This contains enough information to destroy everything your family built. Then let it." The answer seemed to surprise everyone. Even Marco looked toward him. Victor's confidence faltered. "You do not mean that. I spent 20 years protecting an empire built around a lie. I will not spend another night protecting it from the truth." Victor glanced toward the tunnel, searching for an exit that was no longer open. Sophie used the moment to move toward Lucas. She kept her steps light, counting the distance in her head. 8 feet, 6, 4. Victor noticed. "Stop." Sophie did, but she was now close enough to see Lucas in the edge of Marco's flashlight. His wrists were secured in front of him. A red emergency switch was mounted on the column beside his chair. Old transit systems used those switches to cut local power and unlock maintenance gates. Sophie looked at Lucas. He followed her gaze, then gave the smallest nod. Dante spoke again, pulling Victor's attention away. "You wanted me angry. Anger always made you predictable. Not anymore." Sophie moved. She brought the wooden tip of the bow against the emergency switch. The station filled with a loud alarm, and every maintenance gate released at once. Lucas pushed himself sideways, chair and all, clearing the column as Marco crossed the space between them. Victor reached for Sophie, but the sudden alarm masked her steps. She moved toward the sound of Dante's voice, not away from it. Marco reached Lucas and cut the plastic ties with a small utility blade. Rachel and 2 federal agents entered from the opposite tunnel, their flashlights filling the station with overlapping circles of light. "Victor, hail," Rachel called. "Set down the drive and step away from the platform." Victor looked toward Dante. For a moment, Sophie saw the older man waiting for the response he had spent decades teaching him to give: rage, revenge, a final act that would silence every secret. Dante took one step forward. Victor smiled as if he had won. Then Sophie said his name, Dante. He stopped. The station alarm continued around them. Dante looked at her, and the choice passed across his face before settling into something quiet. He stepped back. "Take him," he told Rachel. Victor's smile disappeared. The agents approached, secured the drive, and led him away without spectacle. Marco freed Lucas completely and pulled him into a tight embrace. Sophie remained near the column, holding her violin in one hand and the bow in the other. Only when the last gate stopped rattling did she realize how hard she was breathing. He looked at Dante, crossed at the violin first, checking it for damage, then at Sophie. "Are you hurt?" "No, Lucas," Marco answered from behind them. "He is safe." Relief moved through Dante's posture, but it did not erase the grief in his eyes. Sophie knew better than to offer easy comfort. Some truths did not heal because the danger ended. They only became possible to face. Dante looked toward the tunnel where Victor had disappeared. "I spent half my life trying to become strong enough to punish the people responsible for my mother's death." Sophie waited. His gaze returned to her. "Tonight, I almost became one of them." She placed the bow inside the case, then held out the violin for him to take. "But you stopped." Dante accepted it with both hands, careful and reverent. "Because you called my name." "No," Sophie said, "because you chose to listen." 3 weeks after Victor Hale's arrest, Sophie stood outside a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan and watched winter sunlight turn the stone steps pale gold. Reporters waited behind metal barriers, calling questions toward every dark vehicle that stopped at the curb. Dante had entered through a private door before sunrise. He had not asked Sophie to come. She had chosen to be there. Rachel Monroe met her near the entrance, carrying a folder thick with signed statements and financial records. Victor accepted a plea agreement. Rachel said, "Conspiracy, financial fraud, obstruction, and unlawful confinement." He also identified the officials and executives who helped him. Sophie looked toward the courthouse doors. "And Dante? He is giving full testimony." The answer should have brought relief. Instead, it made Sophie think of the moment in the Dante had said, "Then let it." At the time, the words had sounded like defiance. Now they had become paperwork, hearings, frozen accounts, surrendered licenses, and public shame. Redemption was less dramatic in daylight. It was slower, more expensive, harder to hide from. Dante emerged nearly 2 hours later with Marco beside him. No crowd of guards followed. No line of black vehicles blocked the street. He wore a plain charcoal coat. And for the first time since Sophie met him, he looked like a man carrying the consequences of his own name rather than commanding everyone else to carry them. The reporters called out. Dante stopped at the microphones. He confirmed that the Luciano companies would cooperate with federal investigators. He announced the permanent closure of every operation connected to illegal financing. He stated that the transportation, restaurant, and property businesses proven lawful would be placed under independent oversight. He did not blame Victor for everything. He did not protect his father's legacy. He accepted responsibility for what had happened under his authority. Sophie listened from the edge of the crowd. His voice remained controlled, but she saw his fingers tighten once around the papers in his hand. It was the only sign of what the words cost him. When the questions ended, Dante found her immediately. His expression softened, though he did not move closer until she nodded. "You came," he said. "I wanted to hear what you chose when no one was underground and afraid." He glanced toward the courthouse. Was it enough? It was a beginning. Dante accepted the answer without argument. That mattered more than any promise. In the weeks that followed, the Luciano empire became smaller. Several board members resigned. Properties were sold. Accounts remained frozen while investigators separated lawful revenue from Victor's network. Dante moved out of the upper floors near Central Park and into a quiet apartment in Brooklyn Heights. Marco took temporary leave to stay with Lucas, who had returned home safely and begun counseling after the abandoned station. Detective Elena Ruiz was cleared of involvement and later apologized to Sophie for the pressure of the first interview. The compromised detective was someone else, a senior officer whose payments appeared in the decoded records. Every thread Victor had tied around them was identified, documented, and cut. Sophie returned to teaching lessons and performing underground, but Fulton Street no longer felt the same. People recognized her from a short video recorded during the staged performance. Most knew only that she had kept playing through a transit emergency. The full truth remained sealed as part of the federal case. One afternoon, an email arrived from the orchestra committee. They had heard about the missed deadline from Mr. Levin, who had submitted a recommendation without asking for favors connected to him. A late audition slot had opened. Sophie read the message 3 times before believing it. She called Dante only after confirming the opportunity was legitimate. "Did you arrange this?" she asked. No. Did anyone associated with you contact the orchestra? No. A pause followed. I know the rules. Sophie smiled at the empty room. You are learning, slowly. On the morning of the audition, she arrived at the rehearsal hall before 9. Her hands felt cold despite the heat. She tuned twice, checked the repaired latch, and reminded herself that this opportunity belonged to her. No debt, no influence, no invisible hand moving obstacles from the path. When her name was called, Sophie walked toward the stage and saw Dante standing at the far end of the hallway. He wore no suit, only a dark sweater beneath his coat. In one hand he carried a violin case of his own. Sophie stopped. What is that? My mother's violin. He looked almost uncomfortable saying it aloud. I opened the storage room yesterday. Sophie glanced at the worn leather case. Are you planning to audition? Not unless the committee has abandoned all standards. She laughed, and the tension in her fingers eased. Dante did not offer advice. He did not tell her she would succeed. He simply stepped aside so the path to the stage remained clear. I will be here when you finish, he said. Sophie entered the hall. The lights were brighter than those in the subway. The room was silent, waiting. She lifted her violin and played the piece that had been interrupted the night Dante fell beside her case. This time every note reached its proper ending. When she finished, no train swallowed the final sound. The committee thanked her and asked her to wait outside. 20 minutes later, the conductor opened the door and offered Sophie a position with the orchestra's community performance program. With the possibility of advancing after the first season, she accepted before fear could make her cautious. Dante was still in the hallway. Sophie walked toward him, unable to hide her smile. I got it. Pride crossed his face, open and unguarded. You earned it. Yes, she said. I did. Dante looked down at his mother's violin case. I enrolled in private lessons. Sophie raised an eyebrow. That instructor deserves hazard pay. She has already increased her rate. They walked outside together into the clear winter afternoon. At the corner, Dante stopped. Sophie, I need you to know that I am not asking you to wait while I become someone else. She looked at him. Good, because I would not. I am asking for the chance to become honest about who I am now. His voice remained steady, but there was no command inside it. I do not know what remains after the investigations. I do not know how long rebuilding will take. Then rebuild because it is right. I will, not because of me, because you reminded me I still had a choice. Sophie let the answer settle. She did not offer him forgiveness for things she had not experienced. She did not promise a future neither of them had earned yet. She simply touched the handle of his violin case. Start with one note. Dante looked toward the city, then back at her. A bad one, an honest one. Side by side, they walked toward the subway, not as rescuer and rescued, not as ruler and subject, but as two people carrying separate instruments into a life neither could control for the other. 1 year later, Sophie returned to Fulton Street Station with no deadline waiting for her and no fear pressing against the back of her neck. The platform looked smaller than she remembered. The same pale tiles, the same flickering light above the far staircase. The same gust of wind arriving before each train, yet everything that had once felt cold now seemed familiar. A temporary stage had been built near the center of the platform for the city's new public arts program, and rows of folding chairs filled the open space where commuters had once hurried past her without looking. Children from neighborhood music schools sat in the front. Their parents stood behind them. Transit workers leaned against the walls. Even Mr. Levin had come. Wearing the same brown jacket he always wore inside his repair shop, Sophie waited near the stage with her violin beneath her arm and watched the crowd settle. The orchestra's community program had grown during her first season. She had earned a permanent position, begun mentoring young musicians, and helped create free lessons for students who could not afford private instruction. The work was not glamorous every day. Some rehearsals began before sunrise. Some performances ended with more empty seats than applause. But the life belonged to her, every part of it. Across the platform, Dante stood beside Marco and Lucas. Marco had returned to work, though not as of security for an empire. He now managed compliance for the remaining Luciano transportation companies, all of them operating under independent oversight. Lucas had left the warehouse and enrolled in night classes for business administration. Rachel Monroe had sent a message that morning saying Victor Hale's final sentencing had been entered and every cooperating official identified through the drive had been removed from office or placed under investigation. The case was finished. No hidden partner remained. No missing account waited to reopen the danger. Dante's father's role had been entered into the official record, and the lie that had shaped Dante's life no longer belonged to rumor or revenge. It belonged to history. Dante himself looked different, though the change was not in his clothes. He still wore dark colors, he still carried silence with unusual weight, but people no longer stepped away from him because they were afraid. He greeted transit employees by name, he listened when Lucas spoke. He waited rather than commanded. The lawful Luciano businesses had survived, smaller and cleaner. Dante had sold several properties and directed part of the proceeds into independent victim support and public music education, with no building, program, or plaque carrying his name. He had also continued violin lessons. Sophie knew because every Thursday evening he sent her a recording of one scale. The first had sounded so rough that she laughed for nearly a minute. The most recent had been steady enough that she listened twice. The station announcer welcomed the audience. Sophie stepped onto the stage as applause rose around her. Dante took a seat in the last row. He had once occupied every room as though it belonged to him. Tonight, he chose the place that allowed everyone else to see. Sophie raised the violin. The first piece was the one she had begun on the night they met, Meditation from Thais. She had performed it many times since then, but never here and never from beginning to end. The opening notes floated above the platform. A train approached, its distant rumble building beneath the melody. For a moment the past returned with perfect clarity, coins striking velvet, uneven footsteps, a dark coat, blood against pale tile. A stranger asking her to leave. Sophie continued playing. The train entered the station, but the sound did not swallow her music this time. The passengers inside saw the crowd and remained quiet as the doors opened. The melody rose above the brakes, above the announcements, above every memory that had once interrupted it. Sophie reached the final passage. Her bow moved smoothly, the last note held, warm and clear, until even the tunnel seemed to listen. Then it ended. Completely, the applause came slowly at first, then filled the station. Sophie lowered the violin and found Dante in the back row. He did not look away. After the concert, the crowd moved toward the exits. Children surrounded Sophie with questions. Mr. Levin inspected the old scratch near the edge of her violin and declared it part of the instrument's character. Marco thanked her for saving Lucas without using those exact words. Lucas promised to bring his niece to the next performance. One by one, everyone left till only Sophie and Dante remained near the stage. He carried his mother's violin case in one hand. "You brought it," Sophie said. "I was told there might be an opportunity for beginners that was intended for children. Then I may finally be among my equals," she smiled. Dante opened the case. The violin had been restored carefully, though the wood still carried the marks of age. He lifted it with the same caution Sophie had seen the first time he held hers. "One scale," he said. "No more, I make no promises about applause." He played. The first note was imperfect, the second was better. By the fourth the sound steadied. Sophie listened without correcting him. When he finished, Dante lowered the instrument and looked toward the place where he had fallen a year earlier. "I thought power meant no one could force me to lose anything again," he said. "It only made me afraid of everything I could not control." Sophie closed her violin case. "And now? Now I know control is not the same as safety." He stepped closer, stopping with enough distance for the choice to remain hers. "I am not asking you to enter the life I had. Good. I am asking whether there is room in the life you chose for someone still learning how to live." Sophie looked at the man before her. Not the name people feared, not the empire he had surrendered. The man who had testified, accepted consequences, rebuilt honestly, and learned to ask instead of claim. "There is room," she said, "but you walk beside me, never ahead of me." Dante held out his hand. Sophie took it because she wanted to. No one ordered her, no debt required it, no danger forced the moment. They walked toward the stairs carrying separate violins, their footsteps falling into the same rhythm. Behind them, the empty platform returned to silence. A year earlier, Sophie had stopped playing because a stranger was dying. Tonight, she had finished the melody because both of them had finally learned how to live.